Okay, welcome everyone to the Library is Open podcast. I am very excited because today we have a very special guest, a Bywater friend, open source supporter, and a recent public to academic flip-flopper, Sam Passey. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I've been listening to the podcast for a long time.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. We are happy to hear that you are a fan of the podcast. So I'm just going to get right into it. We usually do a little bit of a background with the guest about how you ended up in the library world. So if you wouldn't mind doing the quick little life story.
Sure, yeah. So I thought I was going to be an archivist and got my master's in library science, planned to work in the archives. And I was the guy whose master's program advisor said, I'm not going to sign off on this unless you take at least one public library management class. So I grudgingly did that. And she was a little prophetic because I took a job with Uena County Library in 2007 to run their history center and their archives. I was there for a couple of weeks, and then everyone started looking at me kind of weird. I was like, "What's going on? Do I smell bad?" And my boss came to me, the library director, and he said, "Hey, I'm taking a job in Saudi Arabia, so I'm not going to be here very long." And the HR guy followed him into my office, and he said, "Hey, can you fill in for?" His name was Frank, for Frank until we find someone. And I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'm happy to do that. As long as I can become and go back to the archives when you find someone." And then that next week, we switched ILSs from Horizon 8, which they killed, to Unicorn. Cersei and Dynex had just merged, and so everything was pretty chaotic. And at that point, I was like, well, shoot, if I can handle a migration in week one as a public library director interim, maybe I'll stick around. And they asked me to apply for it. And the rest is kind of history. And so then I was there 17 years, and just a couple of months ago, left, started at Colorado Mountain College as the Associate Dean of Library Services. Academics have like long titles. So um, that's where I am now.
Awesome. Well, we're going to get into that flip-flop in just a second. But first, I want to ask a question because I think a lot of listeners don't know this. And this is a very fun fact that you were a part of the first library ever to go on Aspen Discovery, if that's right.
Yeah, yeah. So Vernal, Utah, which is where Uena County Library is just across the Colorado border. It's just on the Utah side of the border. And so I was very much aware of the Marmot Library Network and PICA, the project that was going on there. In fact, we tried to join and they weren't taking any new members at that point. And they were the first to have like record grouping and all those concepts. And then I forget the year, but Mark Noble and Jordan Fields, who had been the primary developers of Pica, they left Marmot and kind of bounced around a little bit on some other projects. And then Mark reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, I'm thinking of spinning this off on my own. You were interested in before. Are you interested in doing something together?" So, this LinkedIn message thread became basically the RFP for what would become Aspen Discovery. Like we needed a web builder, so that was our key thing because I don't code. I'm not into that kind of thing. No, just enough to get in trouble. And so Mark set up an environment for us to test things out, and I would ask him to make these changes that I thought were major changes, and he said, "Done." It just theme changes that in other providers you'd have to wait until the next upgrade, and it was like just log in and pick your colors, things like that. So it was really really exciting and kind of scary, but we went live and announced it at a computers and libraries conference. Again, I forget the year. I think it's 2019, and went up there and I think Aspen Discovery was just a little footnote at that point. Marshall Breeding had made some observation, like one sentence in one of his reports, and that was it. And here we are today.
So when you talked about it being scary, I want to dig into that for a second. And could you maybe talk about how you got over that fear, how you helped your staff get over that fear, and maybe if you have any advice for other libraries that are going through migration, maybe some things to help mitigate those anxieties?
Sure. So we were um, a small operation. A lot of public libraries don't have huge tech staffs, and we had a systems librarian who kind of did everything, cataloging, a little bit of web design, you name it. He was fantastic. Um, and so his name's Christopher Davis, amazing librarian. He and I were like, okay, so we really like this product. We like this, what Mark's put together, but we're concerned because what happens if the guy gets hit by a bus or decides, I don't want to do this anymore? Um, and we'd seen some growing pains that Marmot over the border was experiencing when the person who developed this left, and they were like, what do we do? And it was around then, I think at that computers and libraries conference, I went to lunch with or dinner with Nate and Jesse Zero, and said, "Hey, do you guys know Mark? You should be talking to Mark." And they'd had to talk a little bit to do some things on the back end, so they were aware of one another and they were aware of the Aspen Discovery Project. And um, Bob Benhoff at Click and Colorado Library Consortium had been saying the same things and was working on a similar project with Mark. And then when Bywater acquired, merged, partnered with Mark Noble and his then company, it really brought the full range of a service company. We knew we were in good hands with documentation. We'd been around the Cohawk community long enough to know that Bywater in particular insists on good communication. There's videos, um, all the documentation stuff, and sure enough, that support structure around Mark and around Aspen Discovery, and now many other developers, has kind of proved itself to be a good functioning model. It was a little scary at first to go and talk to our board, library board, and county commissioners and say, "Hey, can you put some money towards this?" We were fortunate though that we had some grant money that had been slated for another project, and that fell through. And so I said, okay, this is a lot lower risk than it would normally be. If it doesn't work out, we're out some grant money. This is not local tax dollars, which are sacred in a county library, right? More flexibility over grant money sometimes. And so that was what reduced our anxiety. And then because we had a seat at the table, because we could help navigate where this went, and it wasn't just like, well, here's the software, use it this way or deal with it and come up with your workarounds. We very collaboratively worked together with Mark and then eventually the rest of the Bywater team, and identified other things that would help, like integrating calendaring and some of that other stuff that's come so far.
Well, thank you so much for being a forerunner of the Aspen Discovery product. I mean, we really appreciate your experience, and it's been so valuable to some of our partners. And somebody has to be the first, right? You're a great library to be the first. So really, thank you for all that you've done for the community. And now I want to get into, because this is what I really want to get into, is the shift from public to academic. So let's talk about that for a minute. What has been some of the most surprising things about this move over to the academic world?
So I had no idea how many committees there are in academic libraries. I had worked for the University of Utah Special Collections, but again, I was an archivist, and this is way back, 20 years ago now, actually exactly 20 years ago. And there, at my level of the organization, there weren't a lot of committees that I was involved with. I was more direct customer service. I processed archival collections. I just wasn't in the hierarchy to know that all these things were happening. I just was not aware. So I came in, from a public library director where I worked with one library board, but I was more or less in charge of the budget, knowing how much money was coming in, being accountable for how that's spent, presenting policies, just the whole range of things for which in an academic setting there are entire departments and teams of people that do those things. So like for example, trying to figure out what contracts we have with our service providers right now, and navigating like, well, there's this department that does that, and this person handles these kind of contracts and those kind of contracts. There's no like main point of contact for all things libraries like I've been used to. And so figuring out um, how this works. And my particular institution has 11 different campuses. They're all small. I think the biggest campus has like 5 different academic buildings and a library there. The use is quite different. In the public libraries, we would do in a day, if we had a good story time or some kind of event. Public libraries are very event driven. We would circulate in a day as much as some of these academic branches at my current institution do in a year. They're just not print material centric, and yet the infrastructure at this academic institution is set up very print centric. So there's a lot of physical collections that primarily they get used. We're in a statewide Colorado cooperative for sharing resources. And most of our circulation is actually pulling holds that go to a courier that go to other sites. And so we're helping fill the holds um, for the public libraries around us for the most part. And that's awesome that we're able to provide that service, and it gives our student employees something to do in between things. But what the bread and butter of our libraries is instruction and reference, which in the public library setting, that's like very rare to have someone come in and ask a legit research question. And, the librarians all get excited, like, oh, I get to use my degree. And in a way that I'd anticipated using it. So here it's quite fun. My first week on the job, which again was in March of 2024, I spent more time in the academic databases than I had the past decade in my whole job, and just learning how cool they were and how much has evolved in that space. And then it got my mind spinning about, all these things all these tools like Aspen Discovery and Koha, and um, in the academic space, what kinds of things they could do. We my current organization is kind of a closed traditional source. Um, and so that's been a learning curve too, like going from all the freedom of open source where you get to be in that driver's seat or that navigator seat to something else, maybe.
Yeah, I was just going to get into that a little bit more. I mean, how has that been going from such an open source centric platform to not? I mean, how have you been adjusting to that? And I mean, how's that going?
Yeah, some of it's like going from Ford to Chevy. The features are there. It's just things are a little different. The buttons are a little different. It's laid out different, but the core functionality is very similar. And yet, there are things that I took for granted in open source world that just aren't options. Like the idea that I can give each individual staff member a login to Koha, and they can use that if they're at the park running an activity. They can pull up a client on, just go to the website for Koha, do transactions, help patrons um, wherever they are, like spontaneously. Or the internet goes down, but your cell phone's up and you just whip it out and you don't miss a beat. You're just, doing things like that. Here it's um, we use a competitor's product, and I'm not going to name it, but it's you have to install the software. They have a web version, but it's really stripped down. If you want individual staff logins, which I always felt was essential, because if someone's doing a great job, you want to honor that. If someone's consistently messing things up, you need to address that. And if everyone's sharing an account, you have no idea, okay, which of you 6 people is doing this thing incorrect and it's causing other issues. That's and then things like SIP licenses. You want to plug in a new service. Okay, we can do that, yeah, but that's gonna cost this much to turn on this thing. And being used to an environment where it's like, well, sure, we can do that. Just, get the API information or whatever it is and plug it in and you're ready to go. Um, those kinds of things have been a bit of a learning curve for me. We wanted to change the theme on our public catalog to match our institution's guidelines, and so I put in a service request. And this is something I've been able to just log in and do myself, and I was expecting that, and apparently that's not the case. And so they did it. It looks great now, but I had to wait for a micro upgrade for the new theme to come into place. And that's not a put down to this other organization. They just have other priorities. Um, but going from a place where you're empowered by the software and the community to be innovative and do things, to a place where it's more of a negotiation that we can do this, but we've got to bring on all of our partners over time. And I have a very action oriented personality, and that can be frustrating. Death by committee, kind of.
I think a lot of listeners will be able to relate to that, the death by committee and all the steps you have to go through and people you have to get through to get things done sometimes. But with that being said, and now that you've kind of settled in for a while now in your new role, what's next for you? I mean, is there any exciting projects that you're working on or anything that you're really looking forward to?
Well, one of the things that I'm excited about that we're working on, and this is like a side project at the moment, but that's kind of how Aspen started for me, um, is to look at the possibility of using Aspen Discovery without an ILS on the back end, to use it as a CMS, to use it to integrate the electronic resources and kind of be a case study for some of the more of these academic type spaces where we don't do a lot of physical circulation and we're contractually obligated to this other catalog for some time, and there's some advantages to staying with it. Our neighbors are there. It's kind of like being part of the HOA. You live in the neighborhood, you've got to pay the HOA. You can hate it and you can moan and groan about it, or you can try and like get yourself elected to the board and be a leading and driving force. And so that fits my personality better. And this isn't a campaign speech for that, but um, that's more of a long-term thing. But more immediately, I'm wondering, how might we use Aspen Discovery in this intermediate space where it can run our website, it can do a lot of those things that I loved and missed about it, and maybe serve as this bridge to show my neighbors in the HOA, hey, we've been missing out on some stuff. There might be a better way. Um, let's look at this. Let's look at paving these roads that have been dirt roads for a while, stuff like that. To use that metaphor. Um, so yeah. So I don't know if anything will come of that or not, but we're exploring that, and hopefully it will, and hopefully we'll be able to have another one of these interviews that's down the road, and I can say, yeah, so we are the first people to use Aspen as a standalone CMS for a virtual library, if you will, and now there's all these, this whole other market of the space that does it. Because I think that there are probably many other community colleges, law libraries, you name it, where they're not doing library cards. They're not really worried about physical circulation. There might be overdrive. There's definitely a lot of database use. And then maybe even internal, what might it look like? Is there a way we can harvest some of the things that are in services like SharePoint servers or other institutional repository type things? How can we surface those and put them in front of the eyes of in our case, faculty, students, and staff that might make use of it. Um, the other thing I didn't really realize was such a big deal in academic libraries in general is accreditation and evidence, and so that's now that's like, well, we have all these wonderful library tools for like institutional repositories and things, which I'd always viewed as the primary reason of that was to support researching and learning. And now I'm realizing that there's this whole secondary use of them as evidence for the institutional memory of the institution. And so seeing how that space works, how might we apply open source software like Aspen Discovery into that space is pretty exciting to me.
That is incredibly exciting. And yes, you must come back on once if this all goes underway, because I think there's just endless possibilities with the using Aspen as the CMS. That's really, really amazing. And so I'm rooting for you and hoping that this happens. Okay, so we are getting close to the end of the time, but I have a few more things I want to go over before that happens. So I always ask every guest if you have a favorite memory about being in the open source community, a favorite conference, a favorite event, or anything, or just experience you've had in the open source community. If you'd like to share about that.
One of my favorite ones was the um, Koha US conference in McKinney, Texas. I think it was the first one I went to as the pandemic restrictions were softening. And it was just so great to connect with these people that I'd never met in real life, so to speak, in general. And this is just kind of fun. But when I was flying down there, I had a connecting flight in Denver, and I saw this guy that kind of looked like Mark Noble in front of me in the airplane. But it had been some years since I'd seen him in person, and people looked different on Zoom, and I wasn't sure. The guy was taller than I thought Mark was, and things like that. So I texted him. I'm like, "Hey, you flying to the conference today?" He's like, "Yep." "You flying United today?" "Yep." "Are you sitting in this row in this seat?" And he turns around like, "Hi, Sam." So that's always a fun memory there.
That's awesome. It's kind of like when, there's like a celebrity on the plane. You're like, is that so and so? I think it is.
Yeah, yeah, and rather than just like leaning up and being like, "Hey, Mark,"
Yeah.
you know, so
You're
that,
like,
that might speak to my social anxiety, especially after pandemic and being on the plane for the first time in a couple of years at that point. And um, yeah, it's just been so amazing to see the way that people in the open source community rally around each other. If you have a problem, you post it to one of these listservs or Slack groups, and you just have people volunteering information, ideas, reports, things that I never would have thought of. And now I have this amazing network of friends and colleagues all over the country and a couple in like even Europe. The PTFS Europe people have been fantastic, and Interleaf and some of those other organizations. And like, "Hey, if you're ever in Ireland, drop me a line," kind of a thing. And I'm like, "Well, if you ever want to see the national parks or the Colorado mountains, or I'm privileged now to work an hour and a half away from Aspen Ski Resort, and all the Colorado mountain ski towns have campuses. And it's like, if you ever want to come see these places, give me a call, show you around."
that's to me the best thing is having friends all over the world now as a part of, being in the
Yeah,
open source community. It's truly awesome.
yeah.
Well, all right. Now this is a little new thing we're doing on the podcast. You're going to be our guinea pig here. We're going to do a lightning round, a quick
All
little
right.
lightning round. This or that. It's fun. It's easy. So, all right. This or that, fiction or nonfiction?
Nonfiction
Okay.
right
Uh,
now.
right.
I go in like binges, like I'm binging nonfiction, like Nixon stuff right now. I don't know why, I just am. Watergate, all that.
I'm a nonfiction gal myself. All right. Dewey or LC?
Dewey, none of the above. Is that a choice?
That's yeah. I was gonna say that's an and none of the above. Can we go with that?
Yeah.
That'd be an acceptable answer. All right. Audio or print?
Usually audio, like lots of driving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can see that.
I like the idea of reading print books, but I never do.
Yeah, it's a great time saver, and it counts, I feel like. All right. And then I don't even know why I'm asking this one because I'm hoping your answer is going to be one or the other, but dog ears or bookmarks?
Bookmarks.
Yeah, good. Uh,
Yeah, the archivist in me, is like, dog ears, no way. Definitely not paper clips or rubber bands. Those get so nasty after 50 years. Can you imagine?
I'm sure you've seen some things too. And
Oh yeah.
do you have a book drop story, a weirdest thing in the book drop story?
I don't think I do. We get people stealing like books that they don't like out of the library, and we get other people donating books in that they think the library should have that they didn't see on the shelves. So that was always fun to watch what people thought we should have and thought we didn't have, and or thought we shouldn't have, all that.
Yeah.
We put a floor drain and a fireproof door in our book drop room because of some stories that we'd heard from other libraries, though firecrackers and hoses. And
That's a new one. Yeah, I remember the bed bug killer machines in the room when, if there was bed bugs in the library, you'd have to put the books in the heater lamp or, so many different. Yeah. Uh-huh.
gosh,
I know, so many things. Well, is there anything else you want to add before we wrap it up? Anything else you'd like to add that we didn't touch on?
just it's been an amazing adventure, and so happy to be part of the open source community. And even though I'm in an institution right now that is not in open source, that's one of the great things is I can still be part of this community. And to all those others that might be in a similar position, just because you're in a place that doesn't use this software day to day, you can still find a role and be part of it and part of that community. And that's a great thing.
Well, we hope to have you back on a future episode to hear updates about how everything's going. And are you going to be attending any conferences this year that people may be able to catch you at?
To be determined. I'm trying to get moved in a household and manage a life with 7 kids. So yeah,
That's a whole nother episode.
yeah, yeah. Bring my wife on and we can talk about how libraries have helped us survive parenting 7 children.
Wow. I thought one was a lot. Well, all right. Well, thank you, Sam, so much for joining us today. And we hope to talk to you soon.
All right, take care.
Thanks.